Welcome back. We are joined today by Professor Jiang, who uses historical patterns and game theory to predict the direction of geopolitics. And Professor Jiang is famous for many things, among some predicting the return of Trump and also the war against Iran, now a second war, that is. So thank you for coming back on the program.
Thanks, Glenn.
Um, how do you make sense of this war, though, against Iran? I mean, how do you measure how this war is developing in terms of where the successes or failures are?
Right. So first of all, Trump has failed to articulate a purpose and a strategy for this war. At first, it was about uranium enrichment in Iran, and the fear that Iran would develop a nuclear weapon. In fact, in Trump's State of the Union address, he said that he would never allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. And both chambers of Congress, both the Democrats and Republicans rose to cheer and applaud. It was really the first time that Congress demonstrated any unity during that speech. It was an extremely political speech. But the problem with that is that the Omani foreign minister, a few hours before the Americans and the Israelis struck Tehran, told us that the Iranians had already agreed to zero uranium enrichment, even for civilian purposes. So the idea that Trump needs to prevent a nuclear weapon, that doesn't hold. It's just a pretext. And they tried many different excuses. And then finally, Rubio said this. Rubio basically said, look, we had to attack because Israel was going to attack first. And then the Iranians would retaliate against both the Israelis and us. So to defend ourselves, we had to preempt Israel and attack first. Okay? So they're struggling for a narrative. They're struggling to explain to the American people why this is happening. They're also struggling to contain a fallout because after the Americans and Israelis struck the Iranians started to bombard U.S. bases in the GCC, and they closed off the Strait of Hormuz. And this is doing tremendous damage to the global economy. So oil right now, it's approaching $120 a barrel, $110 a barrel. I'm not quite sure, okay? But this is double from a week ago. And remember that the Strait of Hormuz delivers most of this oil to the Asian economies of Pakistan, India, China, South Korea, and Japan. Japan relies on 75% of its oil from the Strait of Hormuz. So in about 7-8 months, Prime Minister Takahashi has informed her cabinet that Japan will be out of oil. And Japan is, a manufacturing powerhouse. So this war has been a disaster. And even today, Trump has failed to articulate why the Americans are doing this, what the purpose is, and what the off-ramp is. And what we're seeing day by day is pretty rapid escalation. In fact, I think the second day or the third day into this war, there are rumors of ground troops. Yesterday, there's rumors that the 82nd Airborne Division of the American Army was given deployment orders, meaning it is possible Americans will choose to airdrop these soldiers into the middle of Iran. For what purpose, we don't know. There's talk of the Americans seizing Karg Island, which is the oil depot of Iran, and which accounts for 90% of Iranian oil exports. There's talk of the Americans funding proxies. There's talk of using tactical and nuclear weapons. There's talk of a national draft to find 500,000 soldiers for a ground invasion of Iran. So this war is completely out of control, and it's completely unclear what the Americans hope to accomplish with this war.
Yeah, the narrative, I think, was very poorly planned, even worse than the war has been planned, because it began, as you said, with nuclear weapons, then it moved over to ballistic missiles. Then, as apparently they want to help protesters, then they was about the oil, that they should be taken out of the hands of Iranians. Then Trump mentioned Iran might take over the Middle East unless, so we had to go in. And as you said, the Israel thing was interesting because if the argument is that Israel will attack Iran, then Iran will retaliate against Israel. Now, I guess Israel and the United States, so they had to go in first. And they're essentially admitting that they're fighting Israel's war, but they can't say that either. So the ability to find a narrative was kind of poor compared to other wars. Other usually have one narrative, all the media, they organize around it, and everyone obediently repeats the same talking points. It hasn't been done well. But this is a war of attrition, though, to a large extent. That is, both sides seeking, well, not both. There's all sides seeking to exhaust each other. But this is in terms of weapons, ammunition, but it's also spilling into energy and water, if you will, or just general economics. How do you see who would exhaust whom first?
Right. So I think Iran is trying to fight a war of attrition, where it is putting pressure on the global economy, on the GCC nations, because Iran believes that the GCC nations, especially Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE, can apply pressure on Trump to end this war as quickly as possible. By closing on the Strait of Hormuz, Iran is trying to pressure the Southeast Asian economies of China, Japan, and South Korea to apply pressure on Trump to end this war as soon as possible. So the Iranians are fighting a war of attrition. Unfortunately, the Americans are fighting a war of destruction. So even though they haven't stated the purpose, it is clear from what is happening on the ground that the Americans and the Israelis are intent on complete and utter destruction of the Iranian government's capacity to deliver basic services to its people. What I mean by that is that they yesterday struck a desalination plant in Iran, so you're denying fresh water to the civilian population. That is a war crime. Then the Americans struck oil facilities in Tehran. These are civilian oil facilities so that citizens in Tehran can drive their cars. And if you look at footage from Tehran, it is the apocalypse. There's acid rain. The entire sky is black, and these people have to breathe that air, so they will develop cancer. They'll have birth defects. It's almost like chemical warfare. So if you are just saying this is a war of attrition, that makes no sense. A war of attrition means when you embargo Iran economically. Why are you targeting civilians? On the first of the war, a Tomahawk missile hit a school in southern Iran and killed about 170 schoolgirls. This is an elementary school. 170 schoolgirls were killed in that. This war, the way it's being constructed, the way it's being fought, seems to me that the Americans are first and foremost focused on the destruction of Iran as opposed to regime change.